Hello folks, welcome back. In this lecture, we are going to talk about how can we connect to GitHub with SSH keys. So far, we are using HTTPS links to clone the repository, right? HTTPS links allows us to use the username and password. Whereas if we use SSH keys, we need to provide the key-based authentication. For that, we need to generate SSH keys. And moreover, SSH-based authentication is more secure than the password-based authentication. For this one, we need to enable on the developer 1 and developer 2 systems because both are using only password-based authentication at this moment. Initially, I'm going to set up the SSH-based authentication on the developer 2 system, nothing but on our Linux system. Same procedure we need to follow on our developer 1 system, nothing but on our Windows system. But I have already enabled SSH based authentication on my Windows system, so we cannot enable it again. Maybe we can enable it later point of time whenever it is necessary. But the procedure is same what we are following in our developer 2 system. Let's go and do that one. So this is my Linux system. I have already logged in as a root user. You can just see here. And currently I am under /root directory. Now I would like to enable SSH based authentication between this Linux system to my GitHub account. This is our GitHub account, right? So I would like to connect to this GitHub account without password or else with SSH keys. For that, we need to generate SSH keys on our Linux system, and those keys we should add to our GitHub account. For this, there is a very good document in the GitHub documentation. Let me open that one. Connecting to GitHub using with SSH. Okay, the link is already propagating, but anyway, so if you search for this one, you can see connecting to GitHub with SSH. There is a detailed documentation is there. Among this, if you want to change existing keys, this you need to follow, but in our case, we are generating new keys. From the starting we are doing, so this is the link we need to go to see what are the commands we should execute to generate SSH keys. You can see here, there is a command called SSH keygen. Let me increase font size. Okay, SSH keygen. And once keys are generated, then we need to start our SSH agent. After SSH agent is started, we need to add our private key to the SSH agent. These three commands we should execute. And instead of executing this entire command, we can just execute SSH keygen as well. Okay. Usually we use SSH keygen. That also works same way, but it is more robust. So this is our Linux system. I'm executing SSH keygen to generate the key. And you can see here, it is generating keys under /root.sh IDRSA. Okay, it generates two keys, that is IDRSA and IDRSA pub. Those two are the keys which it is going to generate. And we need to give just enter, nothing to add. If you need more protection, of course, you can use some passphrase. But in our case, we are just ignoring it. Now we have generated our SSH keys. And if you go inside to /root/.sh, you can see IDRSA and IDRSA.pub. This public key we need to copy onto our GitHub account. Then we can enable passwordless authentication. Before copying this one onto our GitHub account, we need to start our SSH agent as well. For that, you can see the command over here, that is evil SSH agent -s. So I'm just executing this command as well. Once this is executed, one last thing we should do, that is we need to add our private key to this agent so whenever we are using SSH based authentication, it is going to use this private key. So let's execute. Now what I have done, I have generated keys on my Linux system. Now I need to copy my public key onto GitHub account so that the authentication get enabled without any issue. So far I haven't copied it, but just I will try to clone the repository before adding keys and we'll see what happens. Then we'll add the keys and we'll see what happens. For that, I'm going to take one repository. Let me go to repositories. And I'm going to test repository. I just created this one and this is just empty repository. And we can clone this repository. So while cloning, you know, right, we can use HTTPS link. Whenever we use HTTPS link, it doesn't ask for the credentials while cloning it, but while we want to push it, it definitely asks for credentials. Whereas SSH, we need to give the credentials even though we want to download it. Now let me take this one, and I'm trying to clone this repository onto my Linux system. So let me go back to root because I'm under .ssh directory, and pwd currently I'm under root, and we have only Veloxy Technologies Git repo over here. Now I'm trying to clone the repository of the test repo, and we'll see what happens. Earlier it was a HTTPS, it was starting. Now it is started with Git, and we'll see. It is asking to, do you want to enable key-based authentication? Yes, I want to do. And you can see here, permanently added some keys, and it is saying that permission denied, which means that you are trying to clone the repository with SSH authentication, but I don't know who you are. That is the problem, or that is the issue it is throwing. Now what I will do, I will copy my public key onto GitHub account. Then again, I will try to execute this command, and we'll see what happens. So our public key is available under /root.ssh/idrsa.pub, right? So this is the public key. Okay, you can see here, we have already seen that, and you can see, so this is the output of that file. I'm just copying this output and go back to our GitHub account and go to account. Here we need to go to settings. Under settings, there is a SSH and GPG keys. Click on this one, and we should add SSH keys. So far I haven't added any SSH keys. I'm adding new one, and I will name it as a developer2. Then I should add my key over here. So I just added key and add SSH key. Okay, we have added key onto our repository. Now what we should do is, we will try to execute the same command again this time, and we'll see what happens. Now the authentication is fine, and we can able to clone this repository without any issues. Now it is trying to clone, and you can see I could able to clone the repository without any issues. Now I will do some changes and try to push it. Even while pushing also, it should not ask for credentials, whereas in earlier it was asking for credentials, right? So what I will do, I will go inside to test repo and will create a test file. Sorry, touch index.html. Again, I'm creating one index.html. Git status, if I check, one file is there. Git add, git commit, -m, added index.html, git push origin master. That's it. I'm pushing my changes, and this time it should not ask for credentials. You can see it is not even asking for credentials because it is using SSH based authentication. This is how we can connect to the GitHub using SSH. Now same thing I want to do on my Windows system as well. On my Windows system, keys are already generated. So this is my Windows system, and those keys I'm using for some other purpose, so I could not able to disclose or open those keys. I will directly add those keys in my GitHub account, and we'll see whether I can able to clone that repository into my system or not. Before adding keys, I'm just going to clone this repository, git clone, and I'm going to take the repository again. So test repo, right? So I'm just cloning this repository with the SSH link. And even in this system also it doesn't work. Why? Because we haven't enabled SSH based authentication. See here, it is saying that permission denied. So what we need to do, we need to follow again all these steps. Nothing but first we need to generate keys. Yep, here first we need to generate keys, but this step is already done in my Windows system. I don't want to execute this one. And then we need to start the agent, and we need to add these keys to our agent. Okay, I'm going to execute these two steps on my Windows system. Okay, I'm starting SSH agent. Then I'm adding my public key to this agent. Okay, I have given my public key. Now what I am going to do is, I need to add this private key to my repository. I'm just going to copy my private key. Sorry, not private key, sorry, public key dot pub. So this is the public key. I'm just copying this public key. I'm adding my public key into my repository. my GitHub account, go back to settings again and SSH keys and new SSH key. I'm going to name it as a developer1 and I'm adding my keys and add key. Now I have added developer1 key as well. Now if I go back to my developer1 system, let me clear the screen and I'm trying to clone the repository again. So this is the command to clone the repository, and this time it should be able to clone the repository without any issues. All right, so this is how we can enable SSH based authentication. Even 10 developers are working on the same repository. You need not to provide or give credentials to everyone. They can able to use the SSH based authentication. It is secure and it is a seamless process. That is how we can enable SSH based authentication. That's all for this lecture, and see you in the next lecture.